Good to see each one of you here. We extend Christian greetings to each one, and I want to greet you in Jesus' name. If I say to you, who's Jesus? What would you say? Yeah, yeah, he certainly is. Peter said it best when Jesus used a teaching moment. And he said, who do men say that I am? And they went through that. Then he said, who do you say that I am? Peter piped up and he said, I believe that thou art Christ, the Son of the living God. I can't greet you in any higher name than that. There were those that told me they were glad to see me here. Um, I said I was okay with being here, but I would see here in about 45 minutes how I feel about the situation. But I hope there's something that I can say that will help you and challenge you in your Christian life. When Steve asked me if I could come or if I would consider, I said, yeah, I'd consider. I think it was Miriam that asked you all first. And that was some time ago. And I thought, yeah, maybe they'll forget about it. But apparently they didn't. Steve called me here a couple of weeks ago. Then he called me again yesterday just to let me remind me and to kind of see if everything we were on the same page. And we are. And he said, I'm not sure how you can take 70 years of life and put it in 45 minutes, but I'm going to try. I'm going to leave about half of it out. It's the first half that really is the story. But then he did mention that there was food involved. So I thought maybe he said that so that I'd try to get it within a perspective here. But I don't think he was trying to rush me at all. And I understand there's some here that do have adopted children. And it's ironic that he's 5 years old, and that's how old I was when our family split up and we got started handing out. Anyway, and then they said the other one was, 17 months. My sister was 15 months old, and she was the youngest of the ones that got handed out into other families. First of all, I want to say that I want you to see the hand of God in this story. And I want you to see and know that God has a plan for your life as well. Maybe it's not always quite visible. Did you ever question, does God answer prayers? I did through life. I wondered why. But I'm here to tell you that God does. He doesn't always say yes, and he doesn't always answer as quickly as you might want it to come. But God cares for you and your life. So, as we go through this story, I want you to understand that it's God. I don't want no credit to myself, and I don't want no empathy. I want you to praise God if there's anything good about it, because I praise God for what he done for me. And then he brought Beulah into my life. So I give her a lot of credit because she kind of helped me stay on track. And that's good too. Anybody want to take a guess on how many children are out there that are waiting to be adopted? Want to throw a number at me?
500,000.
500,000? There's 400 plus thousand that are in foster care and waiting for adoption. There's actually 113,000 that are literally waiting to be adopted. So, yeah, there's a lot of children out there. But that's just the ones that there are so many more, and I don't want to get into the stories and give you all the negative statistics of the abortion and the children that get killed. And just heard today again that mother killed two of her children. How could somebody do that? My goodness. They must not believe in God, or they must not believe in eternity. Because I don't know how they can do that. All right, I'll get started with it. The story. So yes, you were close on the 500,000 with 400 in foster care and 113. So that put us over 500,000 children that are out there that don't have parents that want to take care of them or can. That's what happened to ours. When let me give you a little picture of what there were 5 of us children, and we had a 1-room shack to live in with a lean-to on the outside. There were 3 of us boys. My oldest brother, Gene, some of you would know. He was 7. And we had brother Billy that was 6, and I was 5. And we had 2 sisters younger than that. The girls got to stay in the 1-room shack with mom and dad. Us boys got to sleep outside in that little lean-to. This carpet is better than what we had to sleep on. We folded cardboard boxes together to lay on, to sleep. Rags and whatever blankets we could find to cover up. My oldest brother, Gene, would stay awake as long as he could at night, keeping the rats away from us. Yeah, that's what we had to live in. So if you think you got it rough, maybe you do. But yeah, so that's what we had. To our playground, our sandbox didn't have any sand in it, but it had a pile of coal. That's what we got to play in. Coal. Can you imagine how dirty it'd get playing in that? Yeah. Then we had a little river down behind the building, behind our house that us boys played at. It was about the size of French Creek. Most of you would know where that's at, about how big it is. Can you imagine 3 boys, the youngest being 5, playing at a river by themselves? We were told later that we were seeing all 3 of us on one log floating down the side of the river, wait for the current to bring us back in so we can get to shore. Yeah, no, that wasn't what I'd say a good home life, would you now? It got to a point that our dad left. I really don't even remember him at home. He just took off. He went to work on they called it the traveling circus. He must have been quite a clown because he stayed away and I hadn't seen him for 20 years. He wasn't there. Mom couldn't take care of us because she couldn't work with 5 children at home. Our youngest sister went directly from the hospital to our aunt and uncle's house, and they raised her. So she never got into a Mennonite family like the rest of us did. Anyway, so because of mom not being able to keep us, she moved in with our grandma, which was in North Canton, Ohio. And the state said, you can't all stay there. So mom didn't know what she was going to do. And grandma's like, okay, we'll figure something out. Because the state was saying, we're going to put you in an orphanage. My oldest brother, like I say, was 7 years old. He said, oh, no, they're not. And then you got 2 younger brothers. They're looking up to big brother. He says, before we go be put in the orphanage, we're going to run away. So, yeah, that was our plan. We were just going to run away. I'm not sure how far we'd have got at that age. But anyway, our grandma Kate's had somebody that came around every week. And his name was Alvy Lapp from Hartville. He had a horse-drawn carriage with a wagon, and he'd sell, I think he had milk, eggs, homemade bread, and in season he'd have fruit that he'd want to sell too. Okay, so our grandma Kate said to Alvy, we got some children here we need homes for. Could you help us? He said, well, I can't give you an answer today, but next week when I come back, I'll give you an answer. So the following week when he came back, he said, we can help you. We'll take the children to our house. And the state said, well, Alvis, you can't keep us all. You can't keep them all. And I'm like, and the reason was because they had children of their own. And now they got 5 more children piled into their house. The state said, no, you can't do that. So they said, well, we'll see if we can find homes for the others. They ended up keeping my oldest sister, Joyce, and she stayed with Elvis. And the rest of us got handed out. When we got to their house, they started giving us baths. The story was given that my sister had to have 3 baths before they could tell what color her hair were. They were so black from the coal and the dirt and the mud and the crime because they were just patted down. At least she had hair. Yeah. But 3 times, and finally they discovered she had blonde hair. So anyway, people would come. They finally got us cleaned up to where we were somewhat presentable. People would come to check out these children that were free for the taking, as you might say. You know what they did? They stood us up against the wall, and the people would come up and walk past us and look at us. That wasn't a very good feeling. Kind of like cattle or something. They could at least, I thought, set us on the couch or something. Anyway, I was glad that they gave us a place to live. Brother Gene got taken to Albert Wagler's home. They gave him a house or a place to live. Billy went to the sleigh bars out in Marlboro. I, in the next year, got handed out to 3 different homes. Started with a Weingart, went to a Miller, and then ended up with the Yoders in that same year. Later, I went back and I asked him, why couldn't I stay at your house? Because I knew the Millers. Later, I got to meet them. In fact, they're the boy that they did adopt ends up having the Miller's Country Store down here on 285. It would have been his parents that had taken me in. And Dave told me here, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, he said, look, you and I could have been president and vice president. So ask him next time you see him which one he would have wanted to be. Because I wouldn't want to be in either one of those positions. So in that time that I got, the Yoders gave me a place to live for 15 years. I stayed there until I met Beulah, and then later we ended up getting married. We moved from there. But throughout that year, or those years that I spent there, never once was I told that I was loved. I was there to help them on the farm. Anything that I could do as a boy, and as I continued to grow. Yeah, I don't remember being told that I was loved. Shoved around, do this, do that. Anyway, 3 things that I can remember that they actually gave me. First thing was the basketball, because they wanted me to speak the Pennsylvania Dutch. And anyway, I was a little stubborn. Anyway, but I got it conquered and I got that ball. So ich kann Deutsch schwätzen. When I was 13. By the way, these Yoders went to the King Church, if anybody's familiar with that. King Church on King Church Avenue. And they had a horse and buggy. So I remember the horse and buggy ride, standing in the back watching, whatever I could see on the way. When I was 13, one morning I got up when Ernie got up and I went and fetched the cows. And he said, well, if you continue to do that for the summer, I'll buy you a brand new bike. What a way to get me up at 5 o'clock every morning. But anyway, I did, and he kept his promise. I got a bike. It was a Schwinn, I believe. Had three gears in it. And I thought, man, I got it made. So yeah, the bike was the second thing that I got. And it was at that point that he told me anywhere I wanted to ride the bike to go to church, I didn't need to continue to go to the King Church because I really couldn't understand. especially the German when they were reading the names. I couldn't understand it. He said, "You can go anywhere you want to, but I want you to go to church." I said, "Okay." So I went to a Baptist church for a while. I kind of enjoyed that. But then as the years went on, they had another son, only one son. His name was Albert Yoder, Al Yoder in Hartville. He would encourage me to come with them to a Mennonite church. I said, I consider. Anyway, so I did. I started going down to what was called the Roman Miller Church in Hartville. Roman Miller was a conservative church, and they were having meetings, revival meetings. That was back. I'm talking about back in the 1900s here. For those of you that this was way back, and um, they were having meetings, not just weekend meetings. It wasn't just 1 week meetings. We had 2 full weeks of every night having meetings. So one night I felt the nudge of the Spirit. I should go forward, but I really didn't know why. But I did. Um, and anyway, when I got in the room off to the side, Roman Miller himself was there. He said, now there were 2 other boys there with me. And he said, "Why did you guys come forward tonight?" The others explained themselves. I said, I'm really not sure. I just felt I needed to come. He said, "Are you saved?" I said, "What's that mean?" He said, "Are you born again?" I said, "Well, I live a pretty good life." He said, "That's why the Spirit called you. He wants you to give your life to Him." So I did at the age of 16. And there were things that I needed to get rid of at that time. I wanted to tell you at the beginning that if you're thinking that I'm going to tell you a lot of trash that I was into, you're going to be disappointed. Because I think when it's under the blood, it needs to stay there. Because God said He's from the east to the west. I don't know my directions here, but as far as the east is from the west. And if God is dismissing my sins, why would I want to bring it back up to His remembrance? Anyway, so life went on from there. I started praying. That's when I was asking you if you believe in prayer, because God answers prayer. Because I enjoyed the farm, that's all I knew. But it was time to find a girl that I kind of would appreciate. God answered that prayer. I learned later that we were not allowed to have contact with any of our parents until after we were 16. So from the time we left, they couldn't come talk to us or anything. That was the rules. So I went over, this was after I was 16, about 17. Went over to visit my sister Joyce. I was actually going to pick her up and go visit my mom, of which had remarried and had 2 more children after that. Okay, but she remarried and still lived in North Canton. At that time, she was still with Grandma Capes. So I went to pick up Joyce, and we were going to go visit our mom. And Joyce had a visitor. Guess who it was? This young lady back here, Beulah. And it's like, wow, how did they connect? Because her folks lived out here in Cochranton. Well, they were connected with the Alvey Labs and they were friends and they came out to visit and she was there and yeah, that's all I'm going to tell you. The rest of it's history pretty much. Her grandma told her not to marry me because he'd be the type of guy that when trouble comes, he's going to leave. Well, now 52 years later, we must not have had any trouble because we're still together. But believe me, uh, she can cause trouble. Or maybe she would say that about, anyway, that's beside the point. The trouble is, the trouble came, we knew where to go to take care of it. I need to get on. We married in 71, and the reason I left the farm was because he made promises he did not keep. He told us that he'd move a trailer in down the road for us to live in, and when it got time for us to marry, there was no trailer. He said, "Oh, our farmhouse is big enough for all of us." Well, yeah, we had plenty of room, but that's not the point. How many of you would have loved to live in with somebody else? You know, she got to the point, she said, "I'd like to make breakfast for just the two of us together by ourselves." Anyway, he didn't keep his promise. He didn't pay me for the work that we done. He said, "Hey, whatever you need, we'll buy for you. The clothes, the food, everything's there." That's not a way to start a young life. We moved to Michigan. She had a brother that lived up there. The year I didn't like Michigan, anybody? I thought it was cold enough here. Yeah, but we moved up there in that year. I got a phone call that I wish nobody would ever have to receive. And that was that my brother got killed. And it happened down here and out in Marlboro, Ohio. He was driving his motorcycle and there was a drunk driver that didn't stop at the red light and he hit him. He killed him. I tell you, there was anger in my heart. I carried that anger for way too long because we had to come down. Our Jessica's mom was only 6 weeks old when she couldn't travel, so she stayed with our Beulah's brother Mervin's family. We came to the funeral. That was the first time, my friend, that I ever saw my dad. 20 years old. He came to the funeral, which I was glad he did. Anyway, we left Michigan because I didn't like it that well. I just didn't fit in. Not with the church, not with the weather. I loved to hunt, and they had a lot of good hunting there. We moved back to Cochranton. I'm going to have to keep going here because I see the time's going faster than I am. In like I say, when after we got married, we were married for, I don't know, trying to get the dates here that Bill wrote down for me. Anyway, it got to the point that I hadn't seen our dad for a long time again. Another almost 20 years passed, and I told Bill, I said, I'd like to find my dad. And she really encouraged me. Yeah, let's find him. We had no address of him. We didn't know where he lived, somewhere in Florida. The hospital had called Debbie, my sister, when he was in the hospital, but then he had been released, and that was in Dade City, um, Florida. We didn't know if he was in Dade City. Somebody told us that he might be in Lacoochee, a little town. So Bill and we started praying and asking God for direction. And as we brought it up in our church, and it was probably a couple months that we shared it with the church family, and we prayed about it. And finally, it was time to go. So go see if we can find my dad. We decided to take 7 days to see if we can find him. We flew down to St. Petersburg, and then we rented a car and drove across the bridge over to Lakeland, Florida. We were there. Well, like I said, we gave ourselves 7 days to see if we could find my dad. And we went to look for him the next morning after we prayed. We took off and we drove through Dade City, and it was a big town. Way too many people for me to start calling around and see. We hadn't had a phone number or anything. So I said, let's go to Lacoochee. That sounded like a nice little town. Let's go over there. And we got there, and it was just a small burg, probably like Shakelyville. Anybody know where Shakelyville is? Something about that size. And there were people around there, and we asked nothing. We went it had a post office, so I went there. And the lady at the post office said, you know, I can't give you that information. I said, I know, but I wouldn't tell nobody. I'm looking for my dad. She said, you didn't hear it from me, but he's got a post office box here. We have one here with that name on it. She kind of headed us in a direction. We went down and we looked, and nobody even knew the name. So I went back again to the post office. I said, ma'am, is there nothing else that you can tell me that might bring me closer to my dad? And while we were standing there, she said, there's a lady walking out there that might know him. She said, just wait a minute. She went outside, and this lady knew my dad. She said, let me go ask him if it's okay for me to bring you over. So we waited. She was back in probably less than 15 minutes. She said, yeah. He said, it's okay for you to come. She said, the only thing I want is to go with you to see his response when he sees you. I said, sure, come on. So we went down there. He was in a gated community. It's not as prestigious as it might sound, because all it was somebody had their backyard fenced in to keep the dog in. And that's where he lived, in a one-room shack. Once again, remember what I told you at the beginning? We had a one-room shack to live in. Now my dad was living in one still. So we walked in there. I walked up to him. I said, "Are you Mr. Reynolds?" He said, "Yes." I said, "So am I." He shook my hand. Right beside him, he had a wire cage. He was sitting out in the middle of what was a yard, but it was all dusty and weeds growing up. But he had this wire thing that people use to burn trash. He wasn't burning trash, he was tossing his beer cans in there. He had one in his hand and he said, "Morse, I will not quit this for you." I looked at him. And the second thing he said was, "It was not my fault." Wow, I thought, what kind of an introductory is this? I just wanted to come. I said, "Dad, I'm not here to accuse anybody of anything. And I don't want you to give that up for me. But I said, I know somebody that you might want to." And I introduced him to Jesus. And he said, "No." We gave ourselves 7 days to find my dad. That morning that we left the motel room, within 2 hours, I was talking to my dad. In 2 hours. And I thought it might take us 7 days to find him. Remember what I said about answered prayer? God cares, and He will answer your prayers. We spent those 7 days. It was the first time I took him to dinner or to lunch. I bought his lunch, and it was the first time that I ever bought a man a beer. He said, "What I want is a beer. I need a beer." I thought, "Dad, what kind of life do you have?" So I bought him one because I told him I'd buy his lunch. So for the next 6 days, I took him to lunch every day. Every day I would talk to him about Christ. No, every day he denied. No, not interested. I've been too bad, he'd say. God would never forgive me. I said, He's in the forgiving business. And He's forgiven people that have been a lot worse than you. I said, "Have you ever killed anybody?" He said, "No." I said, He forgives the murderers as well. Anyway, time went on. Neighbor there worked at Disney World. And he invited us to come to Disney World. He said, "You can get in free, I'll get you in." I said, "I'll go if Dad wants to go." Dad said, "No, I have no desire." I said, "Where do you want to go?" He said, "I'd rather go down to the little Acoochie River and just sit there." So for 6 days, that's what we'd do. We'd go out for lunch, we'd go down to the Acoochie River. We'd sit there and watch whatever was floating by. We left 6 days later and he still didn't want to give his heart. So we went on home, and some very short time later, after my sisters found out that we found him, they wanted to go visit him. I said, "Well, the only way I will do that is if we do something for him." I said, "His shack is in terrible shape, inside and out." I said, "If we can go down there and we can clean that, we can replace the eaves or whatever it takes to fix up the outside and paint it." So I called the people that owned it and they said, "We'll supply everything that you want or need to fix it up. We'll buy the cleaning supplies, the buckets and all that. So we went down, my two sisters, and Beulah didn't go along that time. I went down with them and we spent 3 more days. And the girls trying to convince him to give his life to Christ. Now, he enjoyed him being there, and he enjoyed. We bought him new clothes when we were there, and did what we could. Sometime later, even after the girls were there, we got a call saying he's in the hospital and he's not doing too well. It was what, that same year, I think it was, that we discovered he was in the hospital. We wanted to see him, so Bill and I went back down, and my sister Debbie went down. He had a ventilator on. He couldn't talk to us. Once again, he wouldn't. He had the ventilator, but he could converse with us by squeezing of hands or blinking the eyes. So we said, Dad, you know that you're getting to the end of life. Yeah, he acknowledged that. We said, Dad, we know somebody that's holding a ticket that will let you into heaven. Would you want to meet him? Because he had connections before with Debbie and he was fairly close with her, we had him hold her hand. We said, Dad, if you do, squeeze her hand. She looked at me and she said, he's squeezing. He's squeezing so hard it's about hurting my hand. I said, Dad, really? You want to give your life to Christ? He blinked his eyes. He squeezed her hand. So we led him in the sinner's prayer. The 11th hour. You remember the thief on the cross that said to Jesus, remember me. That's the kind of how it was with my dad. Yes, I know. It was stressful, it was hard, but it was good for us. Because the hospital, they said, you need to give us the right to pull the machine off of him. The first day, we were not comfortable. The second day, no, still not. The third day, when this happened, guess what? Yes, we'd be okay with you pulling the plug. I went and sat down. The lady stayed there with me. And when Beulah came back to me later, she's like, did you see the tears? I said, no, I didn't. She said, there were tears on his eyes. He wants to be with Jesus. My friends, I'd advise you not to wait until you're that late. If Jesus calls you, please answer. Come to him because he wants you. That's dangerously close because in my simple mind, I thought he once again is going to say no. But he said yes. The hospital said, do you want a minister to come? Do you want the chaplain to come? I said, "What kind of ministers do you have?" She asked, "What your faith is?" And I said, "We're with the Mennonite faith." She said, "There's a Mennonite preacher in the area." She called him. His name was Marvin Yoder, and he came and talked to us. I see it's about 8 o'clock already. I'd have a lot to tell you about going through that, but this man, his wife and family came and had helped us through that time with our dad passing, because it was less than a half hour after we went back to the motel room that they called us and said we pulled the plug, and he lasted about 20 minutes. And then he passed. But they said he didn't struggle. He was very much at peace. We had friends that came from Pennsylvania down there. We were at the motel room, and the front office dialed our number and said, "There's somebody here to see you." I said, "Send them back." Here was some friends of ours that took the time to come down and be with us. And that morning, we had a black rendezvous at the time. We needed to go somewhere and went out, and that vehicle would not start. It didn't. We got any mechanics. It didn't click. It wouldn't turn over. Nothing. It was just dead. This family came, and I really didn't want to struggle with it right then. I didn't want to have to go find a mechanic. So this brother and I and the lady stayed in the room. We went out under the tree, and we sat there and visited, and we prayed. We prayed that God would either show us what's wrong with that vehicle or lead us to a mechanic that could help us or something. Anyway, we were there for an hour. So we went back out to see if we could see what the problem was. We turned the key and it started. Remember what I said about it? God answers our prayer. It didn't let us set the rest of the time we were there, and we drove all the way home a couple days later. It still ran. The families had come to share the funeral. My dad wanted to be cremated, so he did. And he was able to be buried in that same lot where he sat and drank his beer, smoked his cigar or the pipe. It was the following year, and he died in 77, 78. And our mom then passed away the following December. He was in the spring, and mom passed away. But when I'd go visit mom and I'd go to leave, she said, "Morse, I'm so scared." Like, "Why, mom? You told me you're a Christian." "No, I'm scared." One of our families went to a Wesleyan church, and they had a pastor that said that I'll come. I'll spend time with her, and he did. And then at her funeral, he told us one of the greatest things he heard her say was, "Pastor, I'm no longer scared." So, my friends, when I blame my dad for leaving, not caring for us children, and then we started being handed out to other families, some of the family members really got bitter. I said, "Look, God, God has a plan. We didn't see it at the time, but now that you know more of the picture, I believe he did have a plan for us. That because had we stayed in Canton, I don't know if we'd ever come to Christ. But because of what happened to our families and the things that went about, and we got introduced to Christ and we accepted him too in our own lives, then we in return could go back to our parents and introduce them. No glory to us. I want everything that God does. He does for us, and he has a purpose. He has a purpose for you in your life. And remember that, my friend. And always seek him when there's things that conflict in your lives. I'm going to stop there. There'd be a lot I could still tell you, but I see it's after 8. I'm sorry, Steve. But if anybody has a question, feel free to ask or come to us afterwards. We'll be happy to share with you anything that we can. Anybody have a question that you would have right off the bat here? If not, God bless you and thank you for listening.